All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good afternoon and welcome to the final ALCTS webinar for spring 2011. The topic is Reengineering the Institutional Repository to Engage Users. I'm Cindy Hepfer, a member of the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee and co-host with Pamela Blue of the ALCTS IR webinar series. Our presenters today are Suzanne Bell and Nathan Saar from the University of Rochester. Suzanne is Economics and Data Librarian and Research Projects Coordinator. Nate is Senior Software Engineer. If you have questions for Suzanne and Nate, please type them into the question box on your screen. They will be answered at intervals during the presentation. Any questions which are not answered during the webinar will be responded to in writing and distributed to all attendees. Today's session will be recorded and you will receive an email with a link to the recording shortly after the conclusion of the webinar. A copy of the slides will also be provided. There may be a slight delay as I turn the presentation over to Suzanne.
Greetings. Can folks see my screen and hear me?
Yes.
Do we seem good? Okay. Well, good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming to this webinar. I'd like to start off, before I even start yapping at you at all, by doing a little poll. The organizers told us all about all the fancy bells and whistles we could do, and we said, well, what the heck, let's do some. So there is a poll. The first one is called, how often do you interact with your repository? And if you could all just take a second to respond to that, it will tell us a little bit about you. Ooh. Oh, this is fun to watch. The little responses are coming in. Okay. Alrighty, it looks like we've probably heard from most people. So we've got lots of you who do it daily and 21% weekly. 23% don't have an IR, so that's interesting. Maybe when we get done you will be inspired to have an IR. We'll find out. Alrighty, so now that we've found out something about you, we can say, hi, and here's something about us. Nice to meet you. This is me on a good hair day. And here's Nate with daughter number 1, Haley, who's pretty cute. But, you know, everybody's a critic. Look at that. So, hello? Could we advance? Come on, buddy. Ah. Well, thank you. Sorry about that. That's sort of dumb. So, just background to give you a setting. University of Rochester. Private university. We go back a few years. We have 3 separate campuses, including one of the separate ones is the Eastman School of Music, which you may have heard of. Across the street from us, we have the huge sprawling medical center. But for the number of folks that this means, it's on the river campus, under 5,000 undergrads, a good body of grad students, 1,200 and some faculty. But for our small size, we are a Carnegie Level 1 research university. And we got into institutional repositories a while ago. So what happened was, as all good stories begin, once upon a time, our provost, as was, went on some trip and got exposed to this idea of institutional repositories and came back and said, we've got to do this, we've got to do this. And the library said, sure, okay, well, let us look into that. So in 2002, we start looking at what software is out there. We chose DSpace, like a lot of people did, for the reasons listed on the screen. back in the day, there were not things like Fedora or BE Press. And what we did before we made a formal announcement about the IR, we put together 3 collections. We started the musical scores collection from the music school. There was a little collection of historical photographs from the Med Center. And on the River campus, it was a fairly substantial collection of computer science technical reports. In March 2003, we had a big launch, ta-da-ta-da, publicity, all this stuff, and nothing happened. Unlike places that have a mandate, the whole IR was at that time met with a resounding lack of interest by our faculty and grad students, and it stayed pretty empty. Now, a couple weeks ago, we heard from Mary Ann Bueller that the faculty, it sounds like they're getting it more about open access and getting their work out there and stuff, and they're appreciating the idea of an IR better, but back in the day, they didn't. We found that trying to collect finished material didn't work. The faculty just didn't see any value in putting their work into the repository. And so rather than hanging around and wringing our hands and moaning, we decided to investigate, why not? How can we fix this? And we did it in an interesting way. We got a grant. Zowie, lots of money. And actually that $103,000 was, we had matching funds of $77K, so about $180K in all, that allowed us to hire an anthropologist, Nancy Foster, pictured here, for 1 year, and the objectives written into the grant provide insight into how faculty do their work and how we might customize DSpace basically to make faculty more interested in it. So, and we're going to do this using what are called work practice studies. This is where a social scientist uses ethnographic methods to study users' actual work activities and habits. Now, the OED defines the best way to conduct work practice studies is to spend long periods of time with the people under study, observing them as they conduct the usual tasks associated with their work. Well, of course, with faculty, a long period of time represents about an hour. But what we did with that hour is we would go in, we'd have one person, usually Nancy, doing the interviewing, and one person running a video camera. So we captured all these on tape. We worked with, you can read the information on the slide for yourself, the 5 departments we worked with were economics, physics, political science, linguistics, and the graduate program in visual and cultural studies. So we made sure we ran the gamut from the humanities to the sciences. The data gathering, the interview, we would ask them, walk us through your research process. Tell us about your office, your layout. When was the last time you touched that filing cabinet? Things like that. Tell us about your research. How do you do it? So we would, as I said, record, videotape everything. Then we had poor slave labor students type this stuff up into transcripts. And then these things would all be analyzed by a very diverse group of people. We engaged in, and let me show you this diverse group of people. Here they are. Pictured here we have the dean of the libraries, a computer scientist, a bunch of reference librarians, a cataloger, a paraprofessional, blah-de-blah. And you can see, this is what it normally looked like. There are lots of post-it notes, and we would run brainstorming sessions. Co-viewing would mean we would show the movie of the interview, and we'd all sit there and look at it, and as things occurred to us, we'd say, stop, and we would call out whatever, incredible revelation we'd had. The transcripts we would read over and over and mark them up in different ways and do all this stuff. So, the outcome of all these sessions was over 150 ideas, from general ones on what the faculty want and need to specific enhancements that we could possibly write and add on to the DSpace software within the time we had. And we only had a year, right? So time was tight. The stopgap, so what we did with that first grant was to write the researcher pages. This was an add-on to DSpace. But we knew really what they wanted was an authoring tool, but we didn't have time to do that. So we kind of filed that away, and we got another grant. What else do you do? So another big bunch of money, but this time for 2 years. And now we're looking into the faculty of the future. How do they do their research? What do they use? How do they write? How do they keep track of their papers, you know, all their articles and things? How do they collaborate with other students and their advisor? This study used both quantitative methods, there was a survey that was sent out, and the same kinds of qualitative methods where we would go and visit them and interview them and tape it and all this sort of thing. And of course grad students don't very often have offices, so now we were truly out visiting them in the huts of their indigenous culture. We went to their apartments and stuff. That was interesting. So all of this research, I mean, here's a cute little factoid that came up. The average grad student spends 7 hours a day on their computer. Good God, poor things. So here's one of the moments where I'm going to pause and see if there are any questions so far. Yeah. Sorry? Okay. Okay. I'm having a hard time getting the questions. Are we still getting echoes? Can you describe what you mean by an authoring tool? To us, we're interpreting this as a place to keep track of the materials you're using, like articles that you're going to reference and things you're going to use in your work, a place to store your work in progress, a place that would allow you to collaborate with others if you're working with other people. How many faculty in grant number 1? It was about 31, I want to say, in all, because there were telephone interviews as well as in person. Okay. So I'm going to go on. So the ultimate revelation of all this user research. The repository needs to become part of the user's normal workflow, or they're not going to use it. It needs to be part of the research process while they are in process. After the research is over, when it goes to publication, they've lost interest. They're gone. They're on to the next thing. It really needs to support collaboration. Our people work with other researchers outside the university a lot, and our grad students work with their advisors. So it's often a very collaborative thing. Yeah, make publishing into the repository easy, or they're not going to do it. That's pretty obvious. You do need to focus on the individual. They're not interested in the institutional aspect of a repository. They're interested in, it's all about me. They want to showcase themselves. And give users control over their work. It's very off-putting to tell somebody, you can put this stuff in, Oh, but if you see afterwards you've made a typo, you have to ask me to fix it. You can't fix it yourself. That's dumb. So the thing was, given how very different all these requirements were from the software we had running our repository at the time, we determined the only thing we could do was create an entirely new system. We couldn't re-engineer DSpace enough to do what we felt really needed to be done. So we did. We created an entirely new system from scratch, and we call that repository software IR+. It was built to support faculty and graduate students, to act as an online document management system, a place to put your files and take care of them and manage them and find them again, support collaboration, including version control, very fun. Personalization, again, we're going to bring the researcher page that we originally invented for DSpace, we'll bring that along and make sure that that's part of IR+. And lots of personal control. You put it in, you can fix it. For you visual people, a way to think of it as, so I made this graphic. You have your usual institutional repository part, right? That's still there. A bunch of collections and the materials in them. It's basically public. It has documents, those are the green icons, and the weird looking link icons, those are links out. It has the researcher pages where you can have materials from the repository or personal materials you want to share or links out to things. And you have your user workspace, which is private. That is yours, and that's where you can do your work. Putting this in words, here it all is again. Personal workspace, share versions, share files, track versions, researcher pages to showcase yourself, easy publishing, and lots of stats. How many downloads? How many of this? How many of that? People love downloads. Now, another thing from our previous experiences, not related so much to the end users but to us, we really wanted to address issues around metadata. So we built IR+ to keep that metadata clean, because nobody likes dirty data. Man. So things like, we have a person name authority system, and when Nate does the live demo, you'll see what that means. That's a beautiful thing. It uses control lists as much as possible for the data entry, so that it reduces typing as much as possible, thus reducing errors. And all of these things actually have this marvelous byproduct of interesting and additional information displays that are totally system generated. And as Marcy Strong, the cataloger that we work most closely with on all things UR research, said, wow, once we cleaned it up, it stayed clean. That was cool. So, and now we're going to pause. We're going to have another little poll. So you get to, rather than listening to me, you get to do something. And so the second poll is, how satisfied are you with the metadata support in your repository, for those of you who are using one? Okay, have we probably heard from most people? We've got a lovely whole range. From 11% of you are very satisfied, 17 are somewhat, 37%, this is the largest number, are neutral, meh. 24% are somewhat dissatisfied, and 11% really think it stinks. So, that's very interesting. Okay. Well, given that, let's see, oh, one last thing. Are there any questions before we go to the live demo? Okay. No grad students in Grant 1. Correct. It was just faculty. Grant 2 was about grad students. Another question, how many researchers on the research team? How many? Well, Nancy was the PI, but the whole group was, there was a bunch. Yeah. The core team was about 5 people, and the project team was about 13 or 14. Can I describe DSpace researcher pages? Well, it allowed the person, I don't know. Take a look, the IR Plus ones are better. What can I say? DSpace did not ever decide to adopt the researcher pages into their core code. So, and a lot of years have passed, I can't really remember. Who implemented IR Plus? Existing staff or folks hired on the grant? Nate Saar. We hired, Nate is on our staff full-time on hard money. He wrote most of it and he implemented it. So he is existing staff and he is not grant money. He continues with us and you can't have him. Do we assign DOIs or other identifiers that files that users submit? Nate?
We use the, can everybody hear me? We use the handle system for our digital object identifiers. And that's optional. If you want to hook it in, you can, and it's in the instructions on how to do that. But if you don't enable it, then it doesn't have any DOIs.
Okay. Do authors enter in their own metadata? Yes. But as I say, from lots of drop-downs and things. Can you tell if a researcher goes back in and changes something? I guess we could if we were checking up on them. The system doesn't send us a message. But if she changes her data, that's up to her. What we've found, I mean, when we started the whole repository thing, we were all uptight and policies and all this stuff, and we found that just was totally unnecessary. Just getting people to do something was hard enough work. They weren't going to bother to do anything extra. Let me try to get this out right. People are not going to put up junk. We have never had a problem with people putting up junk. To do extra work to put up junk, they know it's out there for the world. They're not dumb. So they're careful. If she changes her data, it sounds like it needed to be changed. How many programmers for IR Plus? We had Nate and we had a contract programmer for about 9 months. Oh boy. There are a lot of questions. You know what? Guys, I'm going to have to hold the rest of these questions so that, because I think we really want to get on to Nate's live demo. So let's hang on. We'll get to them either online or afterwards, but we'll get to all your questions. But for now, let us go see what this means. And I'm going to change presenters over to Nate. Hang in there for a minute.
Hi, everybody. Can you see my screen? Okay, so I think I can see from Suzanne's screen that everybody should be able to see me, and hopefully you can hear me all right. And here is the IR Plus system that we have at Your Research, or Your Research at the University of Rochester. And this is our branded site, and anyone can download this, and it'll look pretty similar to this, except it'll have the IR Plus logo instead of the Your Research logo. So to describe what you're looking at, here is the home page. On the left-hand side, you see a browse search where we can search publications. Below that is the institutional collections, and this is how we organize our publications. On the right-hand side, we have images, and those are images that any institution can upload, and we've uploaded some of ours of our campus. We have researchers, and we can cycle through those, and this highlights the researchers on the home page. And then we have statistics. We have number of collections, 216. We have about 14,000 publications. We have about 1.3 million downloads. We have 2,700 registered users. We could view all the repository statistics, and we'll talk about that in a little bit. And we'll talk more about researcher pages in a little bit too. But what I'd like to do is take you through the submission of a publication. All right, so I logged in, and this is the workspace that someone who has authoring privileges would see. And you can see my upper bar has changed. I've got a few more options here. We've got files and folders and researcher pages. I have an administration drop-down because I am an administrator of the system. Below that, we have several tabs. We have My Files, and you can think of this as a virtual file system. We have publications. We're going to talk about the publication process in a minute. We can search the workspace. So if we want to look for something, we can find it. And we have shared file inbox. This is where when users share files between each other, Suzanne mentioned that researchers can go in and share files with others. They can do that. We're not going to really cover that today, but if you'd like to hear more about that, please feel free to contact us. We'll also have a link at the end that shows you documentation and other things that you can reference to find out more about that. So let's say I wanted to submit a thesis, and you can see I've got files and folders here. I could navigate into a folder. As you can see, I use this quite a bit. I can select a couple of files. Here's 2 files, and I could publish from the drop-down here, and here it is. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to publish from up here, and we'll give it a name. And then I'll click Submit. And now I've entered the submission process. On the left-hand side, you're going to see the file system, and these are all the files that I could look at and add to my system. So if I forgot to add one to my publication, I could do that. And so if I wanted to add the handout, I could do that, and it pops it over to the right-hand side. And on the right-hand side is the files I've selected to put into my publication. Next to each file is the drop-down. In this list, the version. You can see I've got multiple versions of each one. So if I could only put out the post-print or preprint, I could do that. I could move files around, so if I wanted to move the most important file to the top, I could do that. I could remove the file that I just added if it's not part of the publication, so I'll do that. I could also add a link, so if I needed a link, I could do that too. There it is, and I could move it around if I wanted it in the middle. The next thing I could do is I'm going to add information to my publication. And you can see my files at the top. You can see that the title is there. I could add an abstract. I'll just put a little bit of information in here. Here's the control list that Suzanne mentioned. Here is the primary type, and we only have one primary type, and we can select as many secondary types as we'd like. So I'll select technical report and software. Now there's series and report number. We could add an existing series, and here's the list of series that we could select from. We could create a new series. If we can't find the series that we need, we could create a new one, and it offers me the option to do that. And so once I've added this, if I'm a user doing a submission for the first time, it'll then be available to everyone else. And we can do the same with identifiers, so I can add an ISBN. We can manage the extents, so 22 pages. We can select the language. Now, you'll see that language and copyright can't be edited by the user, but these can be administered in the admin section, and they can be updated and added too. I'm going to say this is in the public domain. oops, I can add sponsors, and you can see there's a whole sponsor list here. There's a few dates we can enter. There's the date the publication was first presented to the public. There's the date this publication can be made available to the public, and that's what allows us to set an embargo. So by setting it in the future, I'm going to actually embargo the publication. Here is the publisher information, another control list. As you can see, we have quite a few control lists. This one is in the works. We actually just decided to separate publisher and place of publication. So if you were to download IR+, this feature wouldn't be in there yet, but it is in our development system. What you're looking at is our development system. And there we go. So now that I've added the information, we move on to adding the contributors. And this is where name authority control comes into play. So since I'm doing a thesis, I'm going to look for my thesis advisor. And I just searched for HEMA, and you'll see the first person listed there is Lane A Hemaspondra. And you'll see all the names grouped together, and these are all the same person. And if you'll notice, there's Hemaspondra, there's Hemachandra, and the reason for this is that when Lane got married, he actually combined his name with his wife's. And so these are all valid publication names that he has used. Now I'm going to add the one that's appropriate to me. And so I've added it. And then I'm going to select the contribution type. He's my thesis advisor. And then I'm going to look for me because I was the author. And then there's my name, and I'm going to add it. And now, of course, Lane shouldn't be at the top, so I'm going to move myself to the top because I should be at the top of the publication. And if I couldn't find a name, I could add a new person name, and we can show that window, and you could create the name right there. So now that I'm done adding the names, we get to take a look at what it looks like. And so we get to preview the publication, and we can see all the information that I wanted is there. And then I get to submit to a collection. And here on the left is the listing of all of the collections that are available, and you can see that the system's telling me which ones I can't submit to. And I can navigate into these because this is a tree-like structure, and I can go further down. And you can find the one that you need, so you can see some of them I can submit to. To keep it simple, I'm going to submit to the biology department. And then I'm going to complete the submission. And this takes me to a page letting me know that the item was submitted. And I can go preview it in the institutional repository side once I'm done. Now, what you'll see at the top is more information than normal because I am an administrator. It tells you the fact that it's embargoed. Like I said, I had added an embargo date. And it lets you know that following the embargo, it will be publicly viewable. Normal users wouldn't see this. They would just see the title of the publication. Now, at the bottom, we have some options to manage this publication. And because I'm an administrator and also users who have published themselves do have certain options in editing the publication. So if they've made a small mistake, they can go in and fix it themselves. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to fix the information real quick because I'm going to remove that embargo date. And now you see at the top it's now publicly viewable. And you can see that we can output in several different formats. We can get the OAIDC, and we can get the MARC 21 format. We can output in MARC, and that's coming in the new version of IR+. We can look at the DC terms. We can also get the .mrc file and the MARC as an XML file if wanted. So now that I've shown you how to submit the publication, let's take a look and do some searching for information in IR+. So I did a quick search for HEMA, which was the advisor that I used in my thesis. And you can see on the left-hand side we've got contributors. These are our facets. We can facet by contributor, collections, formats, subjects. So if I wanted to narrow it by Lane A Bandra, we can do that, and you can see I'm down to the 88, and if I wanted to narrow it further, I could. So ones with Edith, we could do that as well. Now, if I click on the author's name, I am brought to what's called their contributor page, and this is produced for anyone who has published into the repository. And so what you'll see is he's got a total of 119 publications. He's got a total of 2,191 downloads. We can also see his latest submission and his most downloaded submission. We can also sort by title, submission date, downloads. So I can look at, for example, ordering by highest download to lowest, so we can see the most popular. So this is a great way for researchers or anybody who has publications in the system, even if they didn't publish them themselves, to see all of the usage that their publications have. Now, I'm going to go back and I'm going to search for Foster. So again, here's our search, and I'm looking for Nancy Freed Foster, and Suzanne mentioned her a little bit earlier in the presentation. And if I narrow by her name, I can see all the publications by her. And if I click on her name, we go to the contributor page again, but there's a small change. You see her picture and also the ability to view her researcher page. And that's because we know that she has a researcher page in the system. So this allows people who come to this page to actually see the researcher information as well. So once they click on that, it takes us to her researcher page, and this is something that's been created by Nancy. And she's entered in all of her information on the left. And on the right-hand side, she's organized the information in a way that she'd like to show that off. And you have links to information outside of IR+. We have links to information inside of IR+. We also can link to files within their personal workspace. So if there's something that doesn't necessarily need to be published into the repository, but the researcher would like to show it off, they can do that. And one example is a lot of researchers we find sometimes add their CV. They can also point to personal publications. We're not going to cover that right now. So that covers the researcher page. Now the other thing I'd like to show, as we're doing IR+, is we can also browse all of the publications within your research. And you can see we've got our 14,000 here. We can also narrow it by the type. So if we wanted to look at all the images, we can see that we've got 590 images, and you can see all the different images and the icons next to them. We could also narrow by thesis, and this is all by having those control lists. We can do things like this. And you can see we've got 1,040 theses in the repository. Now, we can also browse authors and contributors if we wanted to, and we can also browse sponsors. And again, since we have these control lists, for example, we can go to National Endowment for the Humanities, and for a lot of our musical scores, they've given us grants to put a lot of these scores in. And we can point them to this page and say that we've uploaded 5,924 publications, and they've had over 500,000 downloads, so they can see the value that their contribution has provided. Now, going back to that browse page, the other thing is, remember how I narrowed by thesis? Well, the other thing we can do is, let's say that we didn't like thesis, and we said, oh my goodness, we wanted to change it to dissertation. That's not a problem. So we've got 10,040 theses, and we need to change it to dissertation. So we can go to content type, and this gives us a list of all the content types. And I can find thesis, and I would select it, and I would change thesis to dissertation. And this would update all 10,040 with that change. I'm not going to do that right now because it also causes everything to be reindexed so that when users search, it finds them appropriately. But the change is instantaneous. And you don't have to figure out which ones you need to change. It does it for you. And we can do this with a lot of different things. We can change copyright statements. We can change contributor types, departments. So there's a lot of options to fix the metadata and change it and alter it to the way you want it. So to summarize, We talked about the Workspace, which allows you to upload, store, share, and publish their works. We showed off the researcher pages, which allows users to show off the work in their own way. We talked about the contributor pages, which allow faculty and administrators to see usage of work. And a lot of this all fits into the work practices that we found during our research. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to pass it back to Suzanne, but before I do, I'm going to look at, I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have.
There are lots of questions. There are lots of questions. I don't know whether to jump around or just start at the top. Okay, let me try to go through the quick ones. Do you assign researcher IDs? No, we don't. No. Who developed the software? Librarians, computer scientists, or mix? It was a mix. We had our anthropologist, you know, the PI on the grant. We had librarians. We had Nate, our software engineer. We also have a computer scientist. It was a big mix, and it got input from the users all the way along. Felicity asks, how much would you say it costs to develop your own system? I'm getting to that. I have a slide about that. I can't give you an exact figure, but I have a slide about that. We have a question about, that is not a quick question. Just hang on, we'll come back to it. What incentive do researchers have to deposit finished work? We have found that showing them other people's contributor pages and the number of download counts seems to be very incentivizing. Otherwise, no, there's no mandate, there's nothing that says they have to do it. But we've found that peer pressure works rather well. Can we get your software? Yes, you can. We'll talk about that at the end. What metadata scheme did you use? Dublin Core.
Actually, I'm going to answer.
Yeah, do better.
We have a custom metadata scheme. What we've done is we didn't look at any particular metadata scheme. We decided to let researchers or submitters put in any information they wanted to. And what we can do in the administration section is allow them to map to particular types. So you can see that we can map contributor types to DC. We can map identifier types to Dublin Core, so we can select those particular ones that go into the fields. We can also do that with Mark 21, and I've been working with Marcy, our cataloger, to figure out how to do that. And you can do some level of customization. So there is no particular metadata format that we base this on.
Good. Okay. Sorry. Strike my answer. What does the public see if the embargo date? How do they know it has an embargo? What you would see on an embargoed item is only the name, the title of the item, like the interior workings of flies. You know, it's usually a thesis that's embargoed, and I can't think of the scientific name for flies at the moment because I'm nervous. But they would see the title, and then they would see in big red letters, embargoed until date, so that it makes it very clear that it is embargoed. But you don't even get the person's name. You only get the title of the item. Okay, did your handles, persistent URLs, stay the same when you moved to IR Plus from DSpace? Yes, they did. That was the whole idea. So yeah, they remained the same. That was a beautiful thing. Do you have plans to support any other export formats besides MARC and OAI PMH?
I can answer that one. Not at this time. Right now, those are the two major formats that we've found that have been needed, so we haven't decided to support any others at this time, but as needs arise, we'll make the determination later.
Okay. Can you add items from IR Plus to the catalog? If so, how?
I can answer that one.
Good.
For right now, not yet, but we are looking at doing that for our theses. The export of the mark was created to do just that, is import that thesis mark record into the catalog. So what we do is an administrator will go in, download that mark file, that MRC, and then import it into OCLC or your ILS.
What does this have to do with the topic of this webcast? I am confused. What is the buy-in? I have a slide about the buy-in that is coming up, so hopefully we will bring you back in and it will line up with what we said we were going to talk about again in just a minute. Is it possible to create a publicly accessible record that does not have a corresponding file? You can create a record that only has metadata or only has a link. It does not have to have a file in it, in the sense of it, you don't have to upload a PDF or something. So I think that's the answer to that question. How do you control permissions? For instance, there are some collections to which you cannot submit. How is that controlled? Through the administration system. I will just say, you would get added to groups that have rights to submit to XYZ, and an administrator would have to do that. How do we get more info? At irplus.org. Where does your authority information come from? Your catalog, OCLC? The OCLC authority file. Yeah.
And I'm also chime in. A lot that is user controlled. So when catalogers are putting it in, they're doing it through the authority file. When a user is submitting it themselves, they have to search on the name, and basically it's a user-decided thing. We can go in and fix information, and we've had to do that, and that sometimes happens. But it's not that hard to do, which is nice. But what happens is we're depending on users to make a logical decision to input it and group the names appropriately.
Okay. Can non-UR people create an account? This is the interesting part, because you can collaborate with people outside the university. What happens is, in the system, it's called sharing a file. You share it by simply entering an email address. The person at the other end gets this email that says, you've been invited to work on XYZ file, and it links them back to UR research. They are then asked to create an account. So yes, they create an account that is just big enough, in a sense, to hold that one file. They cannot upload additional things of their own, but they can work on that file. Now, the questions are just flying in. Let me just go and finish the PowerPoint slides, and then that might address some of the questions, and then we'll try to do any more, and any other ones we will catch up with afterwards.
All right, I'm going to change the presenter back to Suzanne, and this may take a second.
Okay. Oh, I don't know, maybe you can see all the, let me move the questions down here. So migration, going from the old to the new, there really weren't any disasters. How long did it take? I don't remember exactly. It seemed like we did the major move of all the data over a weekend. Then we madly tested, and we really did not tell anyone for about a week. And it didn't matter too much because nobody was paying any attention to it anyhow. So that was okay. And then we just sort of quietly didn't tell anybody, but we didn't hide it. And somehow, news began to get out. It got a little complicated by arrival of daughter number 2, Katie. So it was kind of quiet. It was a very soft launch for about 3 months. We did a lot of cleanup during that time, and we made it all nice and pretty. And all in all, you going to do this for me? Do your cute thing. There. Westward Ho! It was really a glorious journey. It was really not very painful, and it was great result. So now, talking about the money. I've mentioned the value of each of the grants. Then we have our full-time developers, so whatever you would pay a full-time developer, you would count that. Oh, and here, okay, so I misspoke earlier. It's about a 15-month contract person who helped, so that was paid for out of the grant. We now still have our full-time developer. You would not need a full-time developer. You would only need part of a systems administrator. We have 30% of a librarian. That would be me. And servers, about 5% of somebody to run the servers. So it's not really telling you it cost us $950,000 to do this. I can't really tell you. A lot of the research, that was just part of people's jobs. That was what they were doing. So to me, it doesn't really count. These are kind of the best numbers I can give you. I'm sorry. So did we engage users? Well, we went from about 11 people using it to, here's our numbers. There were maybe 7 researcher pages. Now there are 40. We have people actively using their workspace. We have, look at all the shared files. We have this many grad students, faculty, staff. Now the people registered as collaborators, those are people, non-University of Rochester people, who are somehow working with people here. This is since February 2010, when we made the big announcement about the new repository. And this is with hardly any marketing. Nate and I have done some presentations to grad student groups and the School of Nursing. Otherwise, it is all just a viral process. We get 2 to 3 new users. When somebody registers as a faculty or grad student or staff, we get an email so we can approve that. We can check and make sure they're really our faculty, grad student, etc. And these come in, they just trickle in 2 or 3 a week. And we don't, I hate to say it, we don't really work at it because I'm supposed to work at it and I don't have time. But people are finding it and they are using it. And this is just nothing like it was before. Summing up, we found to make the repository successful, it needed to be part of their normal workflow, something where they can do work in progress, one of those 2 words. Give them the opportunity to share, to collaborate, also to showcase the researcher page, and of course to control. The controlled approach to metadata has made fabulous byproducts and benefits, and making the administration easy has made our life so much easier. It's just a lot nicer to work with the thing. Okay, we now have one final poll, and then we'll madly answer as many questions as we can. Where'd my polls go? Polls. And the last poll is just, if you heard about IR Plus before today, how did you hear about it? Okay, I think we're probably about there, and most of you hadn't heard of it. So I hope you feel glad that now you have heard of it. I have to say, it's night and day from working with DSpace. This is fun. The reaction we get from people when we introduce them to it is totally different. They're interested. They want to use it. It's a delight, and we use it ourselves all the time. Now, back to your questions. So the question about how much would you say it costs to develop, yeah, I gave you the sort of non-answer. Sorry, but that's about the best I can do. I keep avoiding, sorry, there's a question about can you link the authority files, controlled vocabularies, to any URIs to enable them to be published as linked data? Nay?
I'll answer that one. The answer is no.
Good.
No.
Okay, well that's a quick answer then. Okay. Do we harvest data from the IR and use it in our discovery layer or catalog?
I'll take that one.
Okay.
Not yet. What we are working with is, some of you may have heard of the extensible catalog, and we're currently working with them to be harvested as part of our next generation discovery. So they harvest from us through OAI DC right now, and we're hoping that they might even start harvesting from us through the MARC OAI output.
Has IR Plus changed the rate of submissions or the percentage of faculty or grad students participating in the IR? I hope my slide showed that. Rate of submissions, right now we're in the period where they're working. I am expecting there are a few more submissions. It's not, I'll be honest, it's not enormous, but they are at least using it, and they know it's there, and they understand what it can do for them. So I think we will see a steady creep also in the submissions. What happens to content after faculty or grads leave the university? Do we keep their data? Yet if it's been submitted to the public side of the repository, it stays. The stuff in their personal workspace, a faculty member, we would presume, is going somewhere else where they have some sort of facility, similar facility for what they were using the personal workspace for. So yeah, those people we would cut off and tell them, please empty out your account. A grad student, we will give them 2 years, presuming that they're working on getting their feet into their new job and getting set up. So we do allow them a little leeway. And it's, wow. Some quick ones. Is IR Plus open source? Yes, it is. There are so many questions. We're going to have to follow up afterwards, folks. I'm so sorry, but it's 2:58, and I do want to turn this back over to Cindy to wrap it up. You know, please feel free to get in touch with us, and we will go through and answer all these questions afterwards. Thank you so much for your attention and your interest. It's been a pleasure. And now back to Cindy, and this will take a sec.
Okay, I think we're back to me. Thank you, Suzanne and Nate, for a superb presentation about the U of R's IR. I greatly enjoyed learning about your development and design of IR Plus and seeing the demo, and I hope the audience did as well. Attendees, thank you for joining us today. Pamela and Blue and I hope you found today's session useful. Shortly you will receive an online evaluation form. Please take a few minutes to respond. Your comments are valued and help the ALCTS Continuing Education Committee plan new continuing education offerings. Information about all ALCTS webinars can be found on the ALCTS homepage. A full slate of webinars is scheduled for the fall, 2 of which are IR related. On August 24th, Paul Royster will present about the art of scanning, and on November 30th, Dan Kipnis will present on a yet-to-be titled webinar. The CE Committee also hopes to sponsor a special webinar this summer after the RDA announcement is made by the U.S. National Libraries, and will advertise this on appropriate discussion lists and the ALCTS homepage. I would also like to mention the ALCTS CE Committee is hosting a webinar open house at ALA in New Orleans on Sunday from noon to 1:30 in the Lake Continent Room of the Intercontinental Hotel. We welcome anyone who is interested in learning how to do webinars to stop by. Suggestions for webinars and other continuing educational opportunities are welcome at any time. Please submit an application to present a webinar using the form on the ALCTS homepage, and that's on the screen that's on the slide that's on the screen right at this moment. Finally, I would like to thank Yuan Lee and Felicity Dicus, who backed her up, for providing technical support for today's webinar. The work that members of the CE Committee's Technical Support Subcommittee do make it possible for us to present our webinars. Thank you to everyone for joining us this afternoon, and I hope you will participate in other ALCTS continuing education offerings again in the future.